how the people are doing. So, another day, another comparison. Now, the Find X7 Ultra. Look, I understand a lot of people have been asking for the OnePlus 12. I don't have the phone with me. I'm traveling in like 2-3 days, I guess. And I had to send a few phones ahead of time with my dad and so on and so forth. Look, the point is this. I've got the Find X7 Ultra, I have the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, and I have the S24 Ultra. These are the three phones I'm going to carry with me along with the Pixel, so that's already a lot. And well, essentially, the Find X7 Ultra is, you could consider it to be the big brother of the OnePlus 12. It's supposed to have all the good hardware, it's supposed to be the flagship. So it just makes sense, doesn't it? Also, another thing I want to touch on is the raw photography situation. This is especially concerning the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. Look, raw photography has no place in a camera comparison for two reasons. It's meant for regular folks who may or may not be interested in raw photography. It is, after all, a niche feature meant for camera enthusiasts and someone who understands how to use these features. It's not exactly child's play. I think we all can agree on that. Secondly, raw photos give you complete control, so you can get the image to look exactly how you want. And how I want the image may not be how you want it. So it's really going to depend so very much. Like 90% of the image is going to depend entirely on your personal preference. So it really doesn't make any sense in a comparison, now does it? Anywho, jumping into this main camera shot right here, we're going to start off simple, and yeah, it looks pretty good on both. I do prefer the slightly higher contrast on the Find X7 Ultra, but other than that, there's at least nothing to complain about. Now the main camera close-ups. I'm surprised that no one really reminded me, and also the fact that I forgot when I compared with the Xiaomi 14 Ultra and the S24 Ultra. It's weird, but well, here we are. The Google has good main camera close-ups. The Oppo does seem to struggle a little. Even though it is farther away, it is still not focusing quite perfectly on the flowers. I did take multiple shots. This is a minimum focusing distance on the Find X7 Ultra. So the Pixel does pull ahead here. Although the colors are interesting. The Oppo is warmer than natural, whilst the Pixel, it is cooler than natural. Anyways, moving right along, we did have proper sunlight for, I think it was exactly 3 minutes. And then it was gone for good. So in the meantime, I managed to take this shot, and the Pixel, as you can tell, the HDR processing, it goes through the roof and it is basically perfect. This is exactly the kind of shot you'd want. The Find X7 Ultra weirdly struggles. It usually performs really well, and you'll see sooner why I say that, but I don't know why it just gave us a weird looking image here. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. The Find X7 Ultra has tremendous dynamic range. I mean, just take a look at this. This is one of the hardest backlit images I've taken. The light coming in from the window is the only available light in the room. That's it. And it's performing near flawlessly on both. I expect that from the Pixel for obvious reasons. But the Find X7 Ultra, it has good dynamic range. So the previous one was just an inconsistency that I don't really know the reasoning behind. However, now let's check out Ultrawide. So this is again a fairly simple shot, and I think the Pixel does have a lot of sharpening going on. It does bring out a lot of detail in the leaves, especially if you look in some of the shadows. But to be honest, I kind of prefer how the Find X looks. It is more saturated than I would personally like. I like the colors a lot more on the Pixel. But the Find X's contrast and the lack of sharpening just kind of draws my eyes to it. It's a personal preference at this point. Now this one was a little bit more challenging because obviously there's those lights to control in there. But I kind of prefer how the Find X7 Ultra looks, despite once again just having a little too much saturation, especially if you look at those lights. But here's the fact. The higher contrast just looks proper to me. On the Pixel it looks a little too flat, and that's mostly because the dynamic range is just being pushed all the way to high and then back. Look, I'm not really complaining about the Pixel, I'm just stating a personal preference at this point. It's very neck and neck on both. But in this case, that's not really what's happening, because the Find X7 Ultra is now producing even better dynamic range. Those highlights being completely under control, it looks stunning. And then of course with the ultrawide cameras we can also do macro photography. Now I do think that the Pixel can get a little bit closer as opposed to the Find X7 Ultra. And I'm also really digging the higher contrast on the Pixel. I kind of wish it was doing this with all the other photos, but well, I'll take it. So with the ultrawide done, now let's take a look at zoom. You see, so far it's been neck and neck, but zoom might change things up a little. So 2x is a sensor crop that we supposedly have on both. It does seem to work fairly well enough. I mean, this is a 500% crop, but I do believe that the Pixel just has more artifacting and the edges are just not quite as clear. There's also some haloing from over sharpening, I'm guessing. and it just doesn't look as good as the Oppo. But then 3x, now this is where the Oppo comes into its own. Well, I guess there are some other cameras like it, but the Pixel doesn't really have much in terms of 3x zoom now, does it? And cropping all the way in, it's more than obvious. Now, I'll tell you this much. I think that the Find X7 Ultra's 3x zoom isn't particularly high quality. Like, I expected somewhat more detail as opposed to what we're getting, but it is, comparatively speaking, better as opposed to what the Pixel is giving us, right? And now, of course, long range. We've got 5x on the Pixel, which is very good news, and we have 6x on the Find X7 Ultra, which I think is something that should become the norm. Anyways, cropping all the way in, man, this still blows my mind. I've seen it twice by now, but damn, the Oppo's quality with the 6x is something else. Like, I said that the 3x doesn't look as good. I kind of expected this, but maybe the 6x is just a little too good on the Oppo. But what we can conclude on is that the Pixel's 5x didn't really perform all that well now, did it? Moving on, however, to high resolution. Now, I think this is because I used tap to focus on both phones, but for some reason the Oppo just drastically increased the exposure, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I kind of like the fact that the Pixel allows me to tap to focus, but it doesn't affect the exposure too much. If I have to change the exposure, I can do that, but it doesn't really rely on tap to focus for it. But cropping all the way in, what I can tell you is this: the difference is minimal between the two, but given that the Find X is kind of overexposing, it is producing a cleaner image with very natural detail as opposed to the sharpened detail that I can see on the Pixel 9 Pro. Now, what about the ultrawide cameras? You see, these are also high-res on both phones. And as usual, cropping to 500%, this time the Pixel's actually producing good amount of detail. It almost feels like the Find X is not even trying to bring out the details with the high resolution. And I do see some over sharpening and haloing and artifacting around some of the edges, sure, on the Pixel. But the added detail that we have here, it feels right. But look, to be completely honest and fair, I think something between the two would have been absolutely perfect. But well, we're not really getting that now, are we? With the 3x, however, look, I don't think I need to tell you that the Oppo is going to do a better job here because it does have 50 megapixels, right? And it is doing a better job. I did tell you it would happen, right? Moving on to the long range zoom. Now, this is where we should get some real competition. You see, as a zoom test, Google kind of failed us. But what about high res? Now, high res does improve the quality, and I do believe that the Find X7 Ultra was underexposing when we took the shot, which is unfortunate, sure. Even with less exposure, we are still able to discern a lot more of the edges, and it just looks right, as opposed to significantly more processing and sharpening that we can make out on the Pixel 9 Pro XL. Unfortunate for the Pixel, to say the least. Now, moving on, however, to selfies. Now, you see, the Pixel has quite the ultra-wide selfie camera, and I'm a huge fan of that. The Oppo also has something very similar. I guess it's 0.8x as opposed to 0.7. That's just based on the numbers, but it is extremely close in terms of the field of view, which is fantastic. What can I say? I just prefer my face to be as small as possible in selfies. But in this particular case, I think you can see it for yourself. The Oppo is struggling, and this is the exact same kind of problem we saw with the regular main camera shot we took, and it had the same kind of issue with it being almost overexposed, really lifted shadows, kind of a flat look. I'm guessing it might have something to do with skin tones or maybe human subjects. Now then, we have a backlit by the sun selfie. It's been a while since we did this. It's almost nostalgic at this point. It's been so long since I took proper backlit shots with the sun. I think the Pixel just doing a better job at this point. There's really nothing else to it. I kind of wish the Find X7 Ultra would improve on its human subject thing that it has, the issue that is facing. I'm not really sure what to even call it, but it is what it is. But moving on to selfie portraits. Now, see, this is where the Pixel needs to drastically improve. It's problematic, to say the least. The edge detection is just horrendous on the Pixel. There's no two ways about it. It looks almost as if I'm using a device for 2 to 3 years ago that didn't have good portraits. That's just how it feels, and it is not how a latest generation Google Pixel should ever feel like. It's another one, exact same story. It's better than what we had previously, I'd say, but it's still kind of messing up my sunglasses. There are a few imperfections here and there. It just doesn't look that good. The Oppo, as you would expect, is doing a near perfect job. Basically, every other phone that I've used this year has had near perfect portraits, in terms of edge detection at least. Now, moving on to night selfies, let's just say it's not that good on both. There's no point in describing anything here. They both look ball-sided and well, that's it. Now then, rear camera portraits. You see, here's a weird thing about the Pixel. In very challenging situations like these, it's somehow able to handle the edge detection way better than it usually does. It's still not perfect. There are some weird issues and fuzzy edges all over the place. It doesn't look right. The Oppo is just doing a better job. Not only does it maintain proper contrast as opposed to the really flat look that we're getting on the Pixel, it also has perfect edge detection. Now then, for a 2x shot, the edge detection is still just absolutely horrendous on the Pixel. But I do prefer the higher contrast. I'm not sure why the Findex decided to brighten me up and warm me up all the way to high heaven and back. But well, that's what we're getting, and it's not really my kind of thing. And then for 3x, well, it should be pretty obvious that the Pixel isn't gonna do much here, now is it? It doesn't really have the optical zoom for the details, and the edge detection being pathetic doesn't really help. The Find X7 Ultra, on the other hand, I think it's a little too warm for the natural colors. Actually, the Pixel is the one producing the natural colors here. And then for long range zoom, I almost forgot about this. So the Pixel 9 Pro XL, which is supposed to have one of the greatest software processing capabilities in terms of cameras amongst all smartphones, it doesn't allow you to take any optical zoom portraits. By that I mean you're limited between 1.5x to 3x. That's the range you're getting, which is completely digital in between the 1x and the 5x that we have. The main camera and the 5x telephoto are the optical zooms, and we can't use those for portraits. You know, no matter how many times I say it, it is the most hilarious thing because it makes no sense whatsoever. Now the night portraits. Look, at this point it's obvious that the Oppo is taking the win for portraits in general, but I gotta hand it to the Pixel. The Pixel is able to produce fairly nice looking night portraits fairly consistently for 3 comparisons now. But here's the deal, look at my collar. It's blurred out. Guess what? The edge detection still is just as ludicrously bad as you would have expected it to be. Anyways, let's now move on to night mode. Now night mode, I think this is the most interesting part about the Pixel 9 Pro XL. Sure, it has bad portraits. For someone who might be interested in portraits, which I'm guessing is a lot of people, is gonna be a bit of a problem. But the night mode is something to keep in mind. If you don't care as much about portraits, maybe you're a little bit like me, maybe you don't really do portraits outside of camera comparisons, well then this phone might be for you, because with night mode, yes, in this particular case I think the Oppo is actually doing a slightly better job with the colors. But you see, what the Pixel has is high resolution with night mode. This is not something I've ever used before, because as you can guess, when you have a fairly good amount of light for a night mode shot, of course, like in this case, you can get significantly better detail because you are using high resolution. It just makes sense, right? But that detail boost is not something you're gonna get in every situation. We'll get to that. Now this right here is of course a main camera close-up at night. It seems both can do a really good job. I do believe I struggled a little bit with focusing on the Pixel. It was just for the first shot, but after that, I took 3 more shots and it just focused perfectly. So that's nice. I do also believe that the Find X is maybe a little too bright. Now see, this is a prime example of a situation where the high resolution on the Pixel is not worth using. It's just a bad idea, to say the least, because there's just not enough light. Now don't be fooled by the images themselves. They are stunningly brightened up. That's the night mode doing its thing, and that very aspect is reinforced by the fact that the Pixel, even though it is using 50 more pixels, and even though we just saw how good it can look with night mode, it looks like crap right now because there's not enough light. But regardless of that, having this option could be a game changer for smartphones to come, because having high res for night mode, especially when you're taking a night shot with a good amount of light like we previously did, it could produce sensational amounts of detail. But of course, there's much more than the main camera. We also have the ultrawide, and with the ultrawide, in this case at least, I kinda prefer how the Pixel looks. It has high contrast and the overall quality is pretty much the same, but if you look at the night sky, it looks darker and much more natural on the Oppo, as opposed to really brightened on the Pixel. That makes no sense. Why is the Pixel giving us good contrast but also not giving us good contrast? It's weird, to say the least. Now in this case, I think the Oppo is just doing a better job. It is a little too saturated with the warmth. I think the Pixel's warmth looks very natural, but take a look at the sky and the overall contrast. It looks really nice and appealing and very nighttime-esque, as opposed to looking slightly a little too brightened on the Pixel. It's not perfect on either, but my preference would go to the Oppo. Now then for zoom, we are as usual starting off with 2x, because sensor crop does falter a lot at night, doesn't it? I guess the Pixel's processing is trying to do some heavy lifting at the very least. The Find X7 Ultra, just like we've seen previously, it doesn't really try to sharpen too much, which can be a really good thing. Most phones always try to overprocess. The Find X7 Ultra going the other way can be a really good thing. It does produce less detail, plain and simple, but it also doesn't look nearly as processed and, I guess, amateurish, as some people might like to call it, as opposed to the Pixel. And then for 3x, now I do want to preface this by saying there was a lot of wind blowing right into my face, so holding the camera still for like 2 seconds, especially with a telephoto camera or any kind of zoom, it's difficult. And I would hazard a guess that's why the Oppo is struggling a little and it's got some smearing going on. I'm surprised that the Pixel is able to handle the situation well enough. It seems to be bringing out as much detail as it possibly can, and consider this, the 3x is not optical, it's still producing a fairly nice looking shot. That's worthy of respect if you ask me. Now then, 5x versus 6x on these two babies. And yeah, it doesn't look like $1 billion now, does it? Of course, there's a bit of smearing once again on the Find X7 Ultra. The Pixel, weirdly enough, is able to handle that smearing or any kind of motion blur much better than the Oppo. That's something to just keep in mind. But I also think that maybe we are just getting main camera shots that have been cropped in. It could be the case, which is why we are not really seeing a tremendous amount of difference here. And so with that said, we are at the end of this comparison. I'll be completely honest here. The Oppo, it doesn't have an arseload of options like many other devices that I've used this year, but in most cases it does seem to perform more than well enough with what it can provide. Now there are issues, obviously, like we saw with the selfies and the way it was handling skin tones and so on and so forth, maybe a little bit too warm in many cases, but for the most part, yes, it's not perfect, but it's not bad either, is it? On the Pixel, of course, another smartphone which performs really well in many situations, but not perfect. Not by a long shot. It's got its own set of problems right there. Everything else I completely understand, like giving us slightly flatter results because of trying to preserve dynamic range, that's fine. Giving us a wider field of view on the selfies, hell yeah. Giving us high res with night mode, incredible stuff. But the portrait modes, like come on, a lot of people use portrait modes, don't they? It makes sense to have good portrait mode on the Pixel of all cameras. Oh well, with that said, I do hope you guys enjoyed, found this helpful, and to be honest, that's not really much of a recommendation here because the Oppo inherently is difficult to buy in most countries, so I guess it's mostly a benchmark comparison more than anything else. I'll see you guys tomorrow with more. Cheers!